do men want?
Manifests itself in relationships, and you feel it in relationships, and they can be very powerful spiritually. And if that's what you need, that's what you should go for.
And she said, oh, I'm going to go do a sweat lodge this evening. And I begged her to take me along, and that was about 6 years ago.
Welcome to Speaking of Men. You're watching public access television from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. And our guest today is Darlene Boisvert, who is Darlene has a PhD in psychology, and she's teaching a course in women's psychology for the College of Santa Fe right now. And welcome to the program.
Hi.
Good to have you on here, and it's kind of apropos, I guess. University of New Mexico Women's Studies program had just celebrated their 20th anniversary compared to the men's movement, which is probably, well, in swaddling clothes, as they say.
Maybe 10 years old. Y'all could count 10 years
Maybe
in there.
10.
Uh-huh.
You want to talk a little bit about how you came to be teaching this class, what the class is about?
Sure. I teach several psychology courses at the College of Santa Fe, and we had wanted to offer a Psychology of Women course because we're a small organization and we don't have a women's studies department per se. So this is our opportunity to educate men and women with respect to psychological principles involving women, men, and their relationship with one another. So we decided to offer it, and it's been quite popular.
How long have you been teaching it?
We've just taught it one time before last fall, and we're fixing to teach it the second time.
Are you having fun with it, or?
It's a lot of fun.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things that I liked about having the opportunity to teach it is I didn't have to teach it in a traditional college format. Women have different ways of knowing and different ways of expressing experience, and most education has been very masculine, very left brain in its orientation. So in this particular class, we don't take tests, we don't do the customary things. We include music and poetry, crafts, we share with one another what we read, we talk with one another, and it makes it a lot of fun. It gives everyone a break from a lot of the traditional academic approaches.
That's interesting, because a lot of what men's workshops are about are poetry and art and trying to crafts and trying to get into right brain, I guess. Or
The students do a last project that I specifically ask to be a craft or a poem or a piece of music, perhaps a soliloquy, something that shows what they've learned across the course. And the creations are just, they're moving, they're heartwarming, they're beautiful. Yeah.
You know, have you guys, we were talking last night a little bit, do you think feminism has come a pretty good piece down the road as far as general America?
There's a mixed picture on that, very much like the civil rights movement. There's been a lot of headway, but by the same token, there's been a lot of political pulling back and taking away from. I think in general consciousness, it's much less acceptable anymore to put women in a one-down position or to devalue that. We don't, just like we don't allow racist and sexist jokes anymore in our culture. That's a step. As long as that's going to each individual person and they're more conscious, that's a step. But politically, economically, in many other ways, we've actually lost some ground since we got started on this next rendition. There's been a women's movement all across history. This is just our most recent rendition of that. And so it's a mixed picture, I think.
Do you think men are changing at all?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
You know, you were talking a little bit about the struggle for consciousness raising last night on the telephone with me, and in the men, I think, are beginning to be aware that there is a lot of sexual and physical abuse of women, bunches, and it's kind of horrifying, really.
Women and children.
And that no talk rule has really kept dialogue from happening and stuff. You want to talk a little bit about consciousness raising, just per se? Is it possible to do that?
I think that's an important. I think those two concepts are important to put together, because part of what's difficult about consciousness raising, that is becoming more conscious as you move through the world. We operate a lot on unconscious patterns, things from childhood that we're not even really aware of. We replicate patterns that don't really represent who we want to be or what we want to do anymore. So as you become very conscious, what's difficult is you generally also become angry and you experience pain. As men and women walk through the world and don't pay any attention to the unfair stereotypes or to the limitations, that's one thing. But when you're very, very aware, that hurts and you get angry. And for both the women's movement and the men's movement, it becomes important to support one another and to figure out how to tell what to do with that anger, how to turn that into productive activity, how to heal that pain. That's, I think, why a lot of people don't engage in that endeavor, because of the pain. Sometimes it's easier to try not to know what's happened to us or what we do to one another.
Yeah, well, that whole whole healing process has acceptance with a lot of pain in it. Well, we have a short message from our producer, Mike Kruchowski, on kids and guns, and Darlene and I hope you'll stay with us because we'll be right back.
Children and guns are a deadly combination. In the last 5 years, 25 of New Mexico's children have been killed accidentally while playing with loaded guns. An additional 200 children were shot through gunplay over the same period. Almost all of these injuries occurred when children found loaded, unsecured guns at home. Please don't let your children become one of these statistics. If you have guns at home, for any reason, please keep them unloaded. Keep them locked in a safe place, away from your children. Use locked trigger guards, and keep ammunition stored in a separate location. This message has been brought to you by the Emergency Medical Department of the University of New Mexico School of Medicine. As a personal side note, I'd like to mention that good quality locking trigger guards are available for less than $10 each. If you own a gun, chances are it's worth several $100s. Isn't it worth an additional $10 to safeguard your child's precious life or the life of your child's playmate?
Welcome back to Speaking of Men. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. We're speaking with Darlene Boisvert, PhD in psychology and instructor at Santa Fe College in a course on women's psychology. And before our break, we were talking about consciousness raising. You want to continue?
Well, I realized I'd gone into the results of it and not been very specific about what it involves. It's paying attention to the patterns that each of us engage in unconsciously, but also paying attention to the patterns in the workforce, in the family, those things that relate to socialization in ways that we just automatically put one another in a particular position or assume things about one another. And so to move through the world, to be conscious of our choices, of our what we say, what we do. And that's really what consciousness raising is. And the men's movement adopted a very similar approach initially to become more conscious.
You know, it's talking to you, I suddenly realized that there's a real, a lot of women I've known the last 10, 15 years have made a real effort to make sure that I take them seriously. You know,
right.
I mean, we're having a discussion. I'm a real person here, and I think it takes me back a little bit sometimes because I'm trying to anyway, but it's, you know, it's I'm getting the message now. Listen to me. Do you hear me?
Well, one of the unconscious things that everybody gets into is replicating earlier experiences, earlier relationships, family experiences. And if you've not been listened to or taken seriously, now when we talk to one another, sometimes we bring all that baggage with us. And we put that on our current communication. So also being conscious is to attempt to leave that baggage back where it was. But from a social standpoint, men talk more. Men give information. They assume, I know that the myth says the opposite, but that in fact is not the case. And the women are often taught to defer. They don't trust their own voices. There's a book called Women's Ways of Knowing that's an excellent book and looks at learning to trust one's voice, to say what one feels, thinks, and believes. And sometimes you have to step past the culture, maybe not of current relationships, but how did your family operate? Did the family allow everyone to express opinions? Did the family have rigid sex roles? And from little on, who talks, who directs, who has information?
Who has power?
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, that's kind of, so we're talking about socialization a
Yes,
little bit.
we are.
You want to expand on socialization? Now, you said something that was interesting that I don't want to miss, and that is that men and women are not so diverse, but within each gender, the sexes are very diverse. Like women are very separate from each other in personalities, I guess, and things, and so are men.
Exactly. That's the kind of spread. You know, we're all interested in the differences. They're provocative in a way. I think they also let us off the hook. It's like, well, if my genes set that up, it's not my fault. I don't have to do anything with it. And yet, in fact, from the research, what we know to be the case is take any of the disputed areas, take verbal ability, athletic skills, spatial perception, whatever. Men differ among themselves wider. Women differ among themselves wider than if you compare men and women together. So we focus on these differences, and I don't know that that's productive. Now, psychology itself is in a quandary there because we do research and we make general statements, but statistically, general statements don't ever describe the individual. And so then we wind up inadvertently stereotyping. For example, if research is taken by the press or in politics, it often then is used in a prejudicial fashion.
To get women one down.
Or conversely, blacks, Hispanics, sometimes men. That is, it keeps somebody one down. And so we're very, very careful to watch the political overtones of the research that we find. And as fascinating as the differences are, and as anecdotally enjoyable as they are, I mean, we love the stories, and when men are with men and women are with women, they roll their eyes and they see these differences in a very large way.
Why did the woman cross the road? Who cares? She should have been in the kitchen anyway.
Oh, my Lord. See, y'all just got to stop that stuff.
Well, I was hoping you had one you could tell me.
Oh,
it's,
no.
It's okay.
No. No, as a matter of fact, part of consciousness raising is trying to remove the stereotypes, which I know you've done as well. It's just, it's easy to fall into those things. It's easy. Socialization even teaches us to, in a way, keep one another at a distance or put on a mask or play a game, and doesn't prepare us very well for adult communication. We were talking last night about how many adults require healing from the dysfunctional families and the dysfunctional experiences.
Well, you know, it really limits us. I guess what you're saying is that my conceptions about women limit my relationships with women and my ability to. If you're in we did a show not too long ago with a couple who founded Male Monogamy Association, and the whole focus is on keeping love in a monogamous relationship and keeping excitement and keeping the love affair going over a long period of time. And I think a lot of those roles you're talking about is what keeps that from happening.
Yeah, I was thinking also it might be important to explain that when we look at heredity or environment, and that's really the question sometimes about differences, you know, do they come from our biological makeup or do they come from our socialization? It's important to realize that these are interactive patterns. We're all born with ranges, with potentials, with vulnerabilities, and what happens from the environment says where we're going to land in that range or if we're going to be vulnerable. So it even works the other way. If you look at differences in the brain, we're not sure, but what environmental experiences, in fact, change the chemistry, change the structure. Also, socialization is all we can do anything about. Unless we're talking about genetic engineering, the socialization part is, of course, what we can change in ourselves or impact in one another. From the moment a baby is born, we want to know what gender it is. Within the first hour of that baby's life, we have research that indicates we operate with respect to it differentially. So at what point can you even sort out the socialization happens so soon and is so pervasive of particular roles, of particular ambitions, of ways of interacting with one another. The roles especially, I think, are the most constrictive. So that's something that we can do something about.
Yeah, they, what is it, girl babies get held a lot more than boy babies?
There's some research to indicate that from the very beginning that's differential. And you're well aware that not very long into that, all of a sudden boys are getting the message not to express feeling.
Yeah, they, William Farrell was talking about the fact that if you went to women and you tried to organize them into groups to go out and kill other women, they would immediately realize that you were abusing them.
You can see my eyes get bigger as you mentioned the concept.
But men are immediately, I mean, from the time we're little bitty, I mean, that warrior thing is just handed to us right up front. So
I was at a conference recently on domestic violence, and I wish I remembered the individual's name, but I'll try to credit him with this point, that he worked with young adolescent males and with males who were engaging in spouse abuse, and found that the fact that they only could express anger, there had been no outlet for the understanding of any other feeling or the expressing of any other feeling. So everything got gunny-sacked and pushed down until anger, the only acceptable emotion, came forward. So he worked with these young men about expressing pain, confusion, love, vulnerability, nurturance, all of those things. And we start to train our little boys very early to not engage in any of those behaviors, especially not to be vulnerable. Nobody likes being vulnerable. No one likes being one down. So if you don't know how to deal with that, anger and power and aggression are going to be what come forward.
Jim Sims was on the program. He talked about the fact that women are in touch with emotion. The men have a hard time dealing with it, and as soon as women begin to deal with emotion, the man becomes afraid. And then when he's fearful, the next thing he kicks into naturally is aggression. And then he's one up, one down, and he's not straight across.
There's the whole dimension of instrumentality versus expressivity is one of the differences that's telling.
Instrumentality versus expressivity.
Yes. Women express. That is different than an instrumental orientation, which is getting the job done, answering the question, having the information. One is more free-flowing. Women mostly care about relatedness. Even if it's research or ideas, we feel a personal relationship with those things. We see things move back and forth in a very fluid way.
Which is an accusation women personalize everything.
Absolutely. And it is personal. You know, I mean, I don't think women need to be defensive about that. That's right. Yeah. Well, I think they do, but I think they show it in other kinds of ways. So you get in a situation where women, if women are talking with women, they ask open-ended questions, draw out feelings, draw out expression and alternatives. Men have been trained to communicate solutions. So when a man and woman sit down and talk together about a problem, the woman feels discounted because the man is telling her what to do.
I've been in that situation.
And he feels discounted because she's not appreciating that he's giving what he has to give. That's what he knows to give.
This is the situation, this is what we're going to do to fix it, and this is what we're going to do now.
And women feel non-empathized with in that regard.
That's interesting.
Men with men seem to handle that just fine. They'll understand that.
Robert Bly was saying that when men talk to each other, they report on the state of the universe.
Yeah, I
And
loved when you said that. He's real good.
and we do, it seems to be.
And we report on the state of an internal universe, this universe.
Well, I think that's something that men, that internal universe is something that we're trying to learn to navigate. You
Rather
know,
than control.
You know, men project a tremendous amount onto women. I mean, let's see. I don't know if this is, I don't think we had this in the interview. Saved by the tape, but we'll
Okay.
talk about it and come back.
All right.
We have a short tape from our producer Mike Kruchowski about one of our ongoing projects with a young fellow looking for his dad. So please stay with us because we're going to be right back.
In September 1990, William J. Scott began looking for his son Billy, whom he hadn't seen in more than 6 years. Unknown to William, Billy also began a search for his father a few weeks later. In early December, Billy Scott appeared with us on Speaking of Men, hoping to get the word to his father. If you know William J. Scott, won't you help us reunite them? Here's what we know about Billy's father. William J. Scott was reported to have been living in the Albuquerque area for the past 5 years. He's 31 years old, 6 foot 1 inches tall, with brown hair and blue eyes. He may have been working in a local sawmill or lumber yard, though he may be contemplating a move to Alaska. If you have any idea where William J. Scott is, please tell him to call me, Mike Kruchowski, at 268-5260, and we'll find a way to get father and son together again.
Welcome back to Speaking of Men. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. We're speaking with Darlene Boisvert, PhD in psychology, who teaches a course in women's psychology, and we're talking about women's psychology. So, well, I've forgotten what I was foaming at the mouth about before, but we got a lot of good stuff to talk about here. You feel feminism is understood? I mean, my experiences in the men's movements led me to believe that most of us don't have any idea what feminism is about.
I think most men and women don't. Well, they've accepted what the press has said, and the press has, had a field day always with a focus on the differences or a focus on the political aspects. Feminists are simply advocates for women's access to the same things that men have access to: education, equal pay, fair pay, advancement, the whole opportunity to just be whoever you can be and to explore that. That means that we may pursue political means for that sometimes. We also pursue personal means, and we used to use a phrase that said the personal is political. That is, the clearer I am and the more that I know that I can move and achieve my dreams, that affects the culture and society as well. So mostly I think if people keep in mind that we're talking about equal access, not one up, nothing specific. Each person might have a different... That's one thing about women, we can all define things differently too. And we find a richness in that. We don't find a confusion. We find a richness in that. But for the most part, equal access, I think, sums it up tidily.
You know, there's a real unhealthy cynicism at work in America. It's cynical of the women's movement, it's cynical of the men's movement, and it seems to be cynical of anything that looks towards solutions for problems. There's a necessity, I think, that America believe, and I believe it, that we can heal as a country and that we can heal as a people. We have not had that in our leadership in a long time, that we can solve our problems and that the federal government doesn't have to necessarily be the person that does that or the group that does that for us, that we can do it.
Although there's a need to be willing to fund the kind of experiences that allow people to do that.
Well, I was at a men's workshop that the women's studies people did yesterday, and we were talking about the fact that State and federal governments are willing to lock a young man up and spend $50,000 a year to incarcerate him, but they won't give him a college education and they won't give him a high school education or the social support
That's right.
to allow him to make it.
That's
Now,
right.
most European countries are they're pro the people they represent.
That's
you know,
right.
the Swedes are for the Swedes, and we're down to about 3 minutes.
Oh, my
so
goodness.
why don't you take about 2 and or 2.5 or so, and tell me just goodness, just tell me how you tell me. Tell me where I
We
go
talked
from
about
here.
so many things.
Well, what I was trying to do is give you an opportunity just to say anything that you haven't covered, just to put out there what
Well,
you
know,
might.
I think our point about humanism might be what we could use right now. You and I both talked about that. Feminist implies humanist, and the men's movement also is looking at a humanistic position. We want to know what each of us want. What each of us want is what everyone wants. You know, we want our needs met. We want to relate to one another. We want to be free to explore and to be the most that we can be. And that's men and women. That's blacks and whites and Hispanics and Native Americans. That's all what any of us want. And so we don't have to, I think we can subsume all our interests and concerns, our concerns with healing and growing under a humanistic framework. And that we all grow out of this. If I'm free, you're free.
What's working against that? Fear, isn't it?
And entropy. None of us.
There's an
wanna
energy
take-
drain, isn't there?
Well, really, there really is. It takes a lot of energy to change a system. Systems are, by definition, conservative. And so sometimes it's just enough to keep our own selves together. There's not a lot of energy left over to keep impacting that change. But I liked what you said at the end of the other show, and that's right. You just keep moving. You just keep doing it.
I believe that. You know, I would like you to come back sometime and talk to us some more.
Okay, I'd like
and
that.
Darlene Boisvert, I'd like to thank you for being on today. This is Speaking of Men. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. Do you have a phone number before I wrap this thing up?
For information about the Psych of Women class?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay. 884-CSFA, College of Santa Fe at Albuquerque. If you call that, they'll be able to give you information about that class and all their other classes.
Well, we're down to about 30 seconds, and so let me do this again. I've gotten a little convoluted here at the end. I'm Mike Rivas. This is Darlene Boisvert, and I host this program, and Darlene has been talking about women's psychology, and the two of us want to tell you, shoot from the hip and love from the heart, and come back and see us again real soon. Looking forward to it. Thanks a whole bunch. Call us with comments. Check the number at the end of the program. Adios.